mea culpa. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins makes his debut at Waitangi, and as Auckland dries out, the South Island swelters. Christchurch and Timaru crack 33 degrees. Australia's ditching the monarch from its money. Should Aotearoa do the same?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahiahi Mārie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. More than 200 Auckland homes are now off limits as the city today was put under a renewed state of emergency. Mayor Wayne Brown also made an apology for his lack of communication during last Friday's extreme flooding. The Mayor and the Auckland Council have been criticised for delays in declaring a state of emergency and not communicating sooner while the torrential rain was occurring. In a video posted online today, Wayne Brown says he needs to acknowledge what hasn't gone well.
I dropped the ball on Friday. I was too slow to be seen. The communications weren't fast enough, including mine. I'm sorry for that.
The Mayor announced Auckland's state of emergency will be extended for 7 days. It was due to expire this evening, but civil defence authorities advised it should be maintained. Mr Brown expects it will be lifted before the 7 days are up. 232 homes have now been red stickered and 1,294 have been yellow stickered. A quarter of the red stickered houses are in the suburbs of Mount Albert, Mount Eden and Mount Roskill. 29 roads are closed across the region, and Emergency Manager Duty Controller Rachel Kelleher says many motorists should think carefully before heading out.
Please avoid unnecessary travel, particularly if the weather is not looking that great out there, and check road conditions if you do have to head out. We still have a number of roads throughout the region that have partial or full closures in place.
The Minister for Pacific Peoples says the Pasifika community has been hard hit. Barbara Edmonds visited the Pacific Response Hub in Mangere today, where many affected by the floods have turned up for help.
Some families here have said food, because it's the start of the school year, stationery costs, uniform costs. Those are pressures that they would have normally every year, but obviously with floods, having to divert some of your family money to other areas, those are the types of needs that they have.
And a state of emergency has been declared on the weather-damaged Coromandel Peninsula this afternoon. Mayor Len Salt says communities have become vulnerable. Opposition parties are pushing back against warnings not to whip up racial tensions for political gain. Chris Hipkins met with iwi leaders at Waitangi this morning for the first time as Prime Minister. Our political editor Jane Patterson is there.
Māori leaders made a plea for politicians to stop extreme and hurtful attacks and not throw them under the bus in election year. National and ACT were both name-checked as attack dogs by Waikato Tainui's Tuku Morgan, speaking afterwards. However, those parties say there should be a conversation about such fundamental issues, and it's Labour that's embarked on a divisive agenda, failing to take the public along with it. Meanwhile, backroom discussions ahead of Sunday's pōwhiri have paved the way for the political leaders to speak on the paipai after the Waitangi Trust indicated it would prefer them not to.
Corrections wants an independent review into a claim it didn't supply sufficient information to the parole board during a rapist's hearing. Joseph Bryder was sentenced to life and preventative detention this week for the murder of a woman just 10 weeks after his release. The parole board says it wasn't told a rehabilitation centre referral had been cancelled for Mr Bryder. Corrections Chief Executive Jeremy Lightfoot says it takes the allegation very seriously but can't yet substantiate whether it's correct. One person has died in the water at Mount Maunganui. Police say emergency services were called to Marine Parade just before 2 o'clock this afternoon. A man is in a serious condition in hospital after falling off a cliff face in Titahi Bay, Wellington. Police say the man was rescued from the rocks below. The US is tracking a suspected Chinese surveillance balloon which entered American airspace several days ago. The Pentagon says it's too risky to shoot it down for fear the debris could pose a safety threat to people. To sport now, and the Black Caps seamer Carl Jamieson is back, but with a caveat for the upcoming home test series against England. Coming off a back injury, the 28-year-old returns after 7 months out of international cricket, but coach Gary Stead says Jamieson will likely only play in the first test at Mount Maunganui.
He is ready to take that next step up. But again, I just lace that with a little bit of caution that we want to make sure we do the right thing by Kyle as well. He's obviously an important asset to us, and there's no doubt what he's done at the start of his career has been pretty amazing. So we want to make sure that we can get him back to that form as well.
A critical phase in football's A-League starts for the Phoenix men tonight when they play Melbourne Victory in the first of 4 away games. Just 5 points separate the fourth-placed Wellington side from the 11th. Coach Ufuk Talay says while Victory sit last, every team is capable of taking points off another.
The table is so close. I think every game is a big game, every game that we play. So for us, it's very important. We're playing away from home. We try to maximise and get 3 points, but it's also very important that if we can't win games, that we don't lose games and give up 2 points to other teams.
Tonight's game is a 9:30pm kick-off. The former Wallabies first five, Matt Giteau, is retiring from professional rugby. The 40-year-old played 103 tests and is widely known for the so-called Giteau law, which saw Rugby Australia relax its ban on selecting overseas-based players for the Wallabies. And the New Zealand golfer, Ryan Fox, is 3 shots off the lead going into tonight's second round of the DP World Tour event in the UAE. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, director Sarah Polley on her extraordinary movie Women Talking. Quantum computers could change the world, but can they work? John Otway, who calls himself rock's greatest failure, and Caribbean novelist Kevin Jarrett Hussein on his book Hungry Ghosts. Call Kim Hillo. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, showers becoming isolated today, clearing from Auckland and Coromandel tomorrow. For Gisborne, partly cloudy, thunderstorms possible inland tomorrow afternoon. Waikato and the Bay of Plenty, scattered showers with thunderstorms possible about Waikato today. Showers clearing and fine breaks developing tomorrow. From Waipomo to Wellington, including Taumarunui, Taihape and Taupo, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, scattered rain or showers. A few thunderstorms possible north of Kapiti in the afternoons and evenings, mainly inland. Fine breaks developing tomorrow. Looking at Nelson and Buller, fine spells and a few showers mainly inland, Westland and Fiordland. Rain or showers with heavy falls at times, gale northerlies developing about the fjords late tomorrow. For Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine and hot. Isolated showers in the afternoons and evenings, mainly inland with thunderstorms possible today for Otago and for Southland. And for Te Kohoot, Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I will have news headlines and traffic news for you at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi, Evie. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Auckland's state of emergency is extended for another 7 days. The risks of lifting it were too high, according to expert advice, due to the scale and spread of the damage, the chance of more slips, the danger of flood waste yet to be cleared, and the ongoing substantial welfare needs of those affected. The numbers tonight, 234 red-stickered homes. That means they're unlivable. 1,298 yellow-stickered. It's estimated there's at least 2 more weeks' worth of building inspections to get through. Be warned, this long weekend, all urban Auckland beaches are off limits for swimming. If you are planning to hit the roads, Waka Kotahi is live shortly with the latest. Coromandel has also declared a state of emergency. We'll have more on that later in the program. But first, Somia Bamiripati begins our coverage tonight in South Auckland with an apology.
I dropped the ball on Friday. I was too slow to be seen. The communications weren't fast enough, including mine. I'm sorry for that.
A mea culpa from Auckland's Mayor Wayne Brown today, as he announced the region's state of emergency would be extended by a week. In a pre-recorded video statement, he said the decision followed advice from both local and national emergency management experts.
In a nutshell, that's because of the risk of ongoing slips, blocked roads and remaining flooding. We're also mindful that it's still raining pretty hard in some parts of our region. We are now so waterlogged that even a modest amount of rain can do a lot of damage.
Wayne Brown said the emergency powers have barely been used so far, but having the declaration in place allows relevant authorities to issue legally binding instructions. Now I'm standing here in the centre of Mangere. This is one of the suburbs that got hammered by last Friday's rains. Homes have flooded. There are people who don't have anywhere to go, no clothing, no food. To my left is the Mangere Community Hub, where there are hundreds of people looking for help. Now you might be able to hear the rain is still pouring, the wind is still blowing. For most people here, it's just common sense that the state of emergency has been extended for 7 days. Here's what they told me.
Yeah, I think so, because many areas around, not only in South Auckland, not Central Auckland, is still flooding, and now the raining still, there's no stop.
Feels like another lockdown kind of buzz, eh? If they really need it, then yeah, I suppose so.
I think it's good because it's like people are affected, so.
That'll be about the only bloody decision they can make, look at it.
Down the road from the community hub is the Pacific Response Hub. Mangere has a high Pacifica population, and they were many of the people affected by last Friday's floods. Minister for Pacific Peoples, Barbara Edmonds, grew up here and says the community's been hit hard in the last 5 years by measles, COVID and now the flooding. She's been speaking with locals about what help they need.
It's definitely clean-up. Some families here have said food. Because it's the start of the school year, stationery costs, uniform costs, those are pressures that they would have normally every year, but obviously with floods, having to divert some of your family money to other areas, those are the types of needs that they have.
Chief Executive of the Ministry for Pacific Peoples, Geraldine Clifford Lidstone, says some people are just sitting on their doorsteps because they don't know what to do. She says while the hub won't reach everyone who needs help, those who do come can help connect others to the right agencies.
It's so fantastic to see these providers that did such a fantastic job for us over COVID pull together again to provide the base for our community to come to, because once you do that, that's when you get into those communities that are most disconnected from the system. They will be connected with their families.
Sonia Bamiripati reporting there. And the Auckland Emergency Management Duty Controller is Rachel Callagher. A few minutes ago, she told me why the state of emergency had to be extended.
Really, the reason for that extension is that we do still remain very much in the response phase of the operation, with new damage and risks coming to light, even today as we speak. So that requires ongoing access to the powers under the declaration, as well as significant coordination with our agency partners.
Is 7 days going to be long enough? There's lots of people out of homes. There's still a lot of rubbish out there. We're told that the housing assessments could take 2 more weeks. Might you need more time?
That's a possibility, but it's also but part of a response to this event of this magnitude is both a response phase and a recovery phase. The recovery phase is also a formal operation, so that does have its own powers and its own ability to stand up activities as required to help the community get back onto that response trajectory.
Rachel, today our reporters have been out and about talking to people. Out in South Auckland, we've spoken to people who simply don't know who they're supposed to contact, where they're supposed to go. They've got limited communication, their houses are in a bad way and they're sitting on their step wondering what to do. I mean, how do you get to those people?
Oh gosh, and that's, we don't want anyone to be in that situation. We've expanded the number of community hubs that we have stood up, so there's lots of different ways people can reach in, both physically, but also, again, we've got our 800 number stood up, and we're looking at additional ways that we can navigate people in that situation you've described into the different support that they need.
What different ways do you think will work, Rachel?
Well, one of the things that we're just looking at the moment is whether we need, for example, with our waste collection, we know that there is a number of vulnerable people out there that may not be reaching in for help. So we're looking at actually going out and physically connecting with them on their properties to see what we can do to help them.
You mean going door to door, knocking and asking what people need?
Potentially in some areas, yes.
Okay. So the risks over the next few days, right? Eve of a long weekend, and I know one of the factors in the decision to extend the state of emergency was, we're waterlogged, there could be more slips. What advice are you giving to people who may be on the move?
Look, I think the advice remains the same. If you're going out on the roads, then you need to have a look at what the state of your journey route is. There's plenty of information there on Auckland Transport's website about closures and things like that. Other things to keep an eye on. Obviously, it's not safe to swim at the moment. We don't recommend swimming. And just generally, just being sensible if we do end up having further rain that causes surface water to rise.
Auckland's playground, right? Up in the west, the forests, the walkways, the beaches. I mean, most of those roads are compromised, aren't they?
Yeah, both the Waitangi Ranges, some of the roads going into the Waitangi Ranges, and also, in fact, the Hanua Ranges down in the southeast. So, again, some of our big recreational areas. So if people are wanting to get out and stretch their legs over the next couple of days, then again, really need to have a look at where they're planning to go and whether the roads taking you to those places are open, and if the track network that you're wanting to visit is also open.
There have been some problems with scavenging. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we have had some reports of people carrying out sort of food recovery and also removing different sort of items from skip bins that are out on the streets. And I guess the key message there to people is that those items have been discarded for a reason, and they could be contaminated with floodwaters. So we really just don't advise that people look to repurpose or recycle anything that's been put out in a skip in a flood-affected area.
You could make yourself sick, very sick.
That's right, yeah, you could do. And if it's an appliance-type item, it may well be unsafe to use, so it's not really ideal to be trying to repurpose those at all.
How's the waste clearance going?
Really good progress with waste. I mean, it's a big job, and I know that there'll be people out there thinking that we're not getting to them quickly enough, but I just can't stress enough that the scale of this event has been huge. To date, we've had 1,500 loads of flood-affected material dropped off by customers through our transfer stations. That's about 500 tonnes of waste. We've got 200 skip bins out there across streets where we've got community-led cleanups happening, and they're being serviced by 20 rubbish trucks. And, of course, they are purpose-built trucks. So, there's a lot of effort going into clearing waste, but it is going to take quite some time to get around the region. And we just really ask that people be patient. We are working hard on it.
There's going to be a lot of really nervous people this weekend, right? And some of them are quite cut off in terms of communications. If something is brewing, will there be alerts on people's phones?
Look, if something is brewing that's of a magnitude that would warrant that, then that's something that we would definitely look at. At the moment, Met Services' advice to us is that, we don't have any current warnings or watches in place, but if that was to change, then we would certainly consider that. But at the moment, fingers crossed, it's looking like we might get more settled weather for the weekend.
And that's Rachel Callagher, Auckland Emergency Management Duty Controller there. 17 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. In a week of severe weather that has seen at least 5,000 Auckland buildings damaged, council assessors have their work cut out for them, with 4,000 building inspections in the aftermath of last Friday's floods. Up to 160 assessors are on the ground each day, some visiting the same property multiple times to update stickers. Reporter Tom Taylor and camera operator Nick Monroe rode along with one of the crews on Auckland's North Shore.
The Bayswater Peninsula has some of the best views in Auckland, looking out across the Waitemata Harbour to the city centre. But that's because many of its houses are perched in precarious positions high on cliffs.
And our main objective of today is to review the current placard on the building and ensure that if it needs to be upgraded or not.
Building surveyor Matthew Dodd took Checkpoint to one of the areas of greatest concern.
What we'll do is we'll have a walk around down here, myself and Tim. Now, if you're able just to go and see if you can knock on the door there, and see if we can track down the receptionist or the owner of the building.
Last Friday, the 32-room Ocean Breeze Hotel lost a chunk of its car park to a slip that also claimed several large pohutakawa. Although the hotel itself escaped with only minor flood damage in its basement gym, assessors are concerned about its proximity to the slip. Mr. Dodd approaches the hotel staff to get more information.
You've already had a rapid building assessment carried out the other day. What we're doing is we note that this job could possibly be of the higher risk, so what we've done is we've come back down here today to reassess, to see whether or not that placard needs to be upgraded or not.
On their first visit to the hotel on Monday, assessors placed a yellow sticker on the door, preventing guests from staying in the rooms nearest the edge of the cliff. On today's visit, while he's fairly confident that the building is still structurally intact, Mr Dodd says the property will require further analysis by geotechnical engineers. While they wait for the engineer's report, the assessors decide to err on the side of caution and increase the out-of-bounds zone.
So I think what we'll do at the moment, just because obviously the weather and how it is, with concerns over the ground being so saturated with any more surface water, if that's going to cause any possible more slippage. So I think what we'll do is, you see there's some tape down there already, is we'll just keep the guys, if you could move that tape back another 20 metres or so.
They also update the yellow sticker, restricting access to about a quarter of the hotel's rooms.
So if you can ensure that all of your guests are all relocated to other parts of the building, and they'll be much appreciated, and that will need to be done as soon as possible.
Around the corner from the hotel, assessors visit a home on the cliff edge where another big slip occurred. Resident Jermaine Joblin says her husband had just finished draining the pool when it happened.
It was sudden, it was quick. It took all of 1 or 2 seconds, and the cliff and our mature Pohutukawa trees all vanished. It just crashed down.
Ms Joblin counts herself lucky that her house is set far enough back from the cliff. Although the ground slumps at the edge of the property, the house is deemed safe to inhabit. Assessors place a white sticker on her front door, meaning unrestricted access to the house, though with a warning to stay away from the boundary. While Ms Joblin's relieved, she says the slip has left her nervous about future weather events.
I guess that's a bit of an unknown, but we carry on regardless.
Back at the hotel after further rain throughout the day, Mr Dodd decides to upgrade the yellow sticker once again in case more slips occur. This time he restricts access to about half the hotel, meaning some of the guests will need to shift rooms. Although it may create a challenging situation to manage, Mr Dodd says most businesses he visits just want to do their best to keep occupants safe.
The Aucklanders that do have us attend their properties or their buildings, they're glad to see us out on site. Even a bit of reassurance, providing them with a little bit of guidance on sort of the processes moving forward for themselves, and to let them know that we are looking into every building that's coming up on our list.
As of 3 p.m. today, 234 red and almost 1,300 yellow stickers have been issued to Auckland properties damaged by the flooding and severe weather of the last week.
And if you were listening to that story on radio, do check out the video version filmed by Nick Monroe. It will be on our webpage. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. The state of emergency in Auckland has been extended for another 7 days, and the Coromandel has declared a state of emergency. How are you getting on? Has your house been assessed? Let us know, 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Ko ewe anō tēnei.
A state of emergency has this afternoon been declared on the weather-damaged Coromandel Peninsula. Auckland's state of emergency has been extended for another 7 days, although officials say it could be dropped sooner. Auckland Emergency Management Duty Controller Rachel Kelleher told Checkpoint they were still in the response phase. A 17-year-old boy has admitted an attack on a 14-year-old girl in Christchurch. He set upon her in Barrington Park last December. The teen, who continues to have name suppression, appeared in the Christchurch District Court today, where he pleaded guilty to charges including kidnapping, strangulation and sexual violation. He was remanded in custody for a sentencing in May. Corrections is seeking an independent review into a claim it didn't supply sufficient information to the parole board on a rapist who went on to murder a Christchurch woman. The parole board says it wasn't told a rehabilitation centre referral for Joseph Bryder had been cancelled. He was placed in a former prisoners unit instead, next to the home of Juliana Bonilla Herrera. President Vladimir Putin has used the 80th anniversary of the Soviet victory in the Battle of Stalingrad to claim that Russia is being threatened again by German tanks. Last month, Berlin agreed to allow its Leopard tanks to help Ukraine. And King Charles won't feature on Australia's new $5 note. The country's Reserve Bank says the design will instead pay tribute to Indigenous Australians. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, bear with me, there's a bit of it. In Northland, slips are affecting State Highway 1 in the Dome Valley, and that highway is still closed from the Brynderwyns to Waipu. In Auckland, State Highway 16 citybound at exit 4A to Whangade, a truck has broken down and has been blocking the northern bound lane. Further down the country, due to a serious crash, State Highway 2 has just reopened north of Dannevirke in the last few minutes. And a slip has closed State Highway 43 between Stratford and Taumarunui. Finally, the following highways in the Waikato Bay of Plenty are still closed. State Highway 25A, State Highway 25 north of Thames and State Highway 23 to Raglan. Our next news headlines and traffic are at 5:40.
I feel like you should have a high-vis vest, Evie. Thank you. There are calls for a rent freeze in Tamaki Makaurau to stop landlords benefiting from further housing shortages caused by the floods. More than 230 homes have been red-stickered, meaning they're unlivable, and close to 2,000 are yellow-stickered, meaning limited access. One of the biggest challenges is rehoming people during the fix-up. Now, earlier this week, the president of the Auckland Property Investors Association, Kristen Sutherland, told Checkpoint rentals will be in short supply.
We may see some increased rents for that period of time, and that's really just down to supply and demand.
Is that fair, though? Is that fair, Kristen, to take advantage at a time when people have been forced out of their homes by a natural disaster to make a bit more profit by, jumping up the price on your rental? I guess I'm not in the position to say whether it's fair or not. It often is just the case.
It's the same in any market when, their supply and demand changes. I don't think landlords are out there to make an extra buck at the end of the day. They're just trying to do the best by their tenants, really, and offer properties to people. And if the rental prices change during that time, then that is the market.
Well, joining us now is the Human Rights Commission's Housing Inquiry Manager, V. Blackwood. V, it's just the market, the Property Investors Association reckons. What do you think?
Kia ora, Lisa. Look, what we're urging is for the government to reassure Auckland renters that they're not about to face an escalating cost of renting crisis to add to the burdens that too many people are already facing. Affordability is a key dimension of the human right to a decent home, and too many people are already living in that serious housing cost stress, paying much more than 30% of their take-home income. That unfortunately also means that they're much less able to respond to urgent and unexpected costs, as we're seeing with these flood responses, people who are having to replace everything in their homes, for example.
So, V, what does reassurance from the government look like? Is that a rent freeze?
It could include a rent freeze. We've been open, calling for the government to intervene for reassurance. So it could include a rent freeze if government policy analysis indicates that that would be the best response. It could also include other support, such as an urgent increase to accommodation supplement and active support from tenancy services for tenants who may not know what their tenancy rights are in natural disaster situations.
An increase in subsidies for rent, won't that just encourage price hikes in the market because people will think, extra money?
There are absolutely difficulties with increasing the accommodation supplement. Unfortunately, there are difficulties with adjusting anything to do with the rental market. There are no quick fixes. We are in a housing crisis and a human rights crisis that has been created by decades of successive government neglect, including not enough attention being paid to the rental market and to protections for renters in terms of how much they are expected to pay in rental costs.
So landlords, some of them would argue they're operating a business, right, like any other. So why should they be prevented from maximising possible profits during this time? Because nobody's suggesting that skip operators should have their fees capped, or people who tow cars, or people who hire out carpet cleaners, generators, water pumps, that kind of stuff.
Sure. And hey, look, we acknowledge that many landlords are working in really good faith with their tenants to respond to that flood damage, to try and get repairs done urgently. There's a huge demand, obviously, for tradespeople at the moment to do those repairs and to support their tenants to get back home as soon as possible. We're not suggesting at all that all landlords are out there to hike up those prices. But what I would say is that landlords are businesses, as you've acknowledged. Businesses also have human rights responsibilities. And so their responsibilities are to respect the human rights of their tenants, and to respect the fact that a decent home is a fundamental human right and not something that can just be divorced, to making profit, especially when people are doing it this rough. In some instances, the stories of people who have left their homes with nothing but the clothing that they're wearing. I don't think that anyone would want to see any business making undue profits off a situation like this.
Good to talk to you, V. Thank you for joining us. That's V Blackwood from the Human Rights Commission. What do you think? 2101 on text, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Does there need to be a rent freeze, and how long for? A key member of the Black Caps test squad is back, but with a caveat for the looming home series against England. The New Zealand squad for the series, which starts with a day-night fixture in Mount Maunganui in 2 weeks' time, was announced this morning, and sports reporter Clay Wilson is here to talk us through it. OK, first off, who are we talking about? And cautious approach, why?
Yeah, this is Kyle Jamieson, the fast bowler for the Black Caps. And he's back, but it's his back where that caution is actually coming, because he's been out for 7 months with this back injury. He injured it actually playing against England in June last year. So he's returned through club cricket, and then he's had 4 games of domestic cricket for Auckland. But when it comes to backs and fast bowlers and that motion and the force that goes through your body, there's almost always a fair bit of caution when they're coming back, especially to international cricket. So it sounds like Coach Gary Stead has said he's only likely to play in this first test and not play in the second test, and to sort of put him on ice for that second test and just let him ease his way back into international cricket, if you will. And I think a smart course, a very important part of this test team, Kyle Jamieson, his first 2.5 years in test cricket were brilliant. He was became the fastest New Zealander to take 50 test wickets. He was a key part of New Zealand winning the World Test Championship. So to have him coming back, you want to make sure that he's coming back and not re-injuring himself and doing any more damage. And playing that first test, day-night match, pink ball, and being a fast bowler, a guy that can swing the ball, move the ball around, that pink ball's known to do a bit more. So it seems like a smart call to have him for that first test and then let him rest up for the other matches to come for the remainder of the summer.
Clay, I'm not judging, but it's Casual Friday in the studio here. You're in shorts and a T-shirt. Would you be allowed into the races in the UK these days?
I think I would. Reasonably tidy. People can't see my shorts on those that are watching.
On the TV, those that are watching? Yep. Yeah. But what's the deal with the UK racing?
Tidy in my house, anyway. Yeah. Well, this is interesting. So, for most, a day at the races involves sort of getting all dressed up to the nines, doesn't it? You bring your fascinators out, and the guys bring their suits out, or maybe their best jeans and sort of dress shirt. But Britain's Jockey Club, they've decided to relax their dress code for 15 of their racecourses in the UK. And this is about making the horse going, a day at the races being more accessible, more inclusive for people that want to go along. Now, you can't go along in your stubbies and your singlet or your jandals, probably. I think they are going to expect some kind of level of tidiness and sort of decorum on the dress front. But otherwise, they're saying they're encouraging people to dress as they feel comfortable. And the Jockey Club CEO says, in the eyes of many, the previous dress code seems rather outdated in the 21st century. So the horse racing world in the UK moving on and going with the times.
It's going to be an interesting experiment. Thank you, Clay. That is our sports reporter, Clay Wilson. And on the eve of a long weekend, many roads are impassable or significantly damaged, and it's hard to keep up if you are on the move. So joining us with the latest is Tresca Forrester from Waka Kotahi. Kia ora, Tresca. Can you bring us up to date with the significant closures or hitches?
Yes, kia ora, good evening. So look, we've still got the significant closure of State Highway 1 north of Auckland at the Brynderwins. So we were hoping to get a lane open, but we're just still experiencing some issues with slips. So we are still working on that over the weekend. There's no guarantee, but I think people should expect it to be closed. And you can take, that light vehicle detour down. Through Auckland City itself, we've only got the Hibiscus on-ramp closed at the moment. But the big one, I think, to talk about would be around the Coromandel. So we've got 25A still out. As you know, we lost that earlier in the week. And yesterday we've lost 25 around the west coast there at Ruamahanga due to rockfall. And so that is still closed tonight. So that will be creating some issues for people travelling through the Coromandel, particularly from Auckland. We are hoping to have a helicopter sluicing that area tomorrow. But again, no guarantee. We are looking at a very vulnerable network across that area. And people that are thinking about travelling from Auckland to Coromandel, we're looking at quite a significant detour at the moment through State Highway 2 through Waihi. And, you probably are wanting to add 4.5 to 5.5 hours, particularly at the moment because we're seeing the peak traffic in leaving Auckland.
Eyebrows have gone up here, Tresca. Eyebrows have shot right up. So just to repeat that, if you were heading into the Coromandel, anticipate delays, depending on your route, of 4 to 5 hours.
That's right, because you have to go down and up and around to get, and this is particularly if you're heading to places like Waitangi or Coromandel Township, because you're going all the way around. And the other thing to note is that, the Thames Coromandel District Council have, declared a state of emergency, and coming with that is to avoid non-essential travel. So we are sort of echoing if it is not an essential, but we recognise to not travel, but we do recognise people will still want to get up to the Coromandel potentially. Another thing to note, I guess, is that is the only way in and out. So we expect that detour route to be really busy over the weekend. So people should expect significant delays through there.
So Tresca, State Highway 25, where there's been this rock slide, you're basically going to, you're going to use water you're going to have an aerial assault on it. Can you just explain that to us?
Yeah, sure. So sluicing is helicopters dropping large buckets of water down the slopes. And what's that designed to do is just to dislodge all the material, so then we can look at it again and say, okay, it looks pretty stable. Because what's really happened in this event is we've had a massive amount of rain, and now people will be thinking, oh, it's dry, it's, everything should be tickety-boo. But unfortunately, everything's saturated, and as it begins to dry out, it gets looser. So I guess that's the other cautionary thing going into the weekend, that may be other parts of the network that do fail over the weekend, which is why we're asking people to either consider their travel plans, but if they are travelling, to stay up to date on our Journeys website.
Tresca, lots of people would have seen that phenomenal vision of the slip on 25, I think it was, that just came down out of the blue, and massive amounts of rubble, so highly dangerous. So, yeah, how are people supposed to know? Because that was like a bolt out of the blue.
That's exactly right. So we do have a team of people that are constantly monitoring and looking at our slopes. Obviously, we're not going to catch everything because things will progress and dry out. We've made we've got the experts having a look. And at the moment, we have closed the road for that. But we're not anticipating significant failures because we wouldn't have opened the road. We may just get some minor failures like that going forward.
So Tresca, just very quickly, your website, best place to get the most up-to-date information?
Absolutely, 24/7, journeys.nzta.gov.nz.
Thank you, Tresca. That's Tresca Forrester from Waka Kotahi. Significant damage on our roads. If you're getting in the car to go anywhere, do check out the website so you can get there. And 4 to 5 hour delays on some routes. Happy days. Iwi leaders have urged the Prime Minister not to throw Māori under the bus in his pursuit of power this election. The challenge was laid at the Iwi Chairs Forum in Waitangi, kicking off several days of commemorations. And the leaders had strong words for the opposition parties too. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, is there.
Entering the Aotea, the Māori arena, Chris Hipkins makes his Waitangi debut, his first time meeting the country's iwi leaders since becoming Prime Minister.
Haere mai, haere mai, haere mai.
Election year promised a robust conversation. Speakers began by acknowledging the late Tete Whai Harawira, a formidable force in the north. The warning to ministers was obvious. Do not relax. Her spirit remains in the room. The meeting then shifted behind closed doors, the discussion spilling out afterwards. Toko Waitangi Morgan of Waikato Tainui was quick to give the opposition a serve and the new PM a challenge.
Will he succumb to the attack dogs of the National Party and ACT as they fan the flames of racism and anti-Māori sentiments and throw us under the bus?
That's something that my government will never do.
Chris Hipkins with a concrete commitment. He says he'll work with Māori to avoid race being used to divide the country. The other parties, he says, should reflect on their own behaviour.
National and ACT have used to, as they have done in the past, they've used uncertainty to try and stoke fear.
Both National and ACT were invited to meet with iwi leaders at Waitangi. Both declined. In a statement, Nationals leader Christopher Luxon accused the PM of shutting down discussion rather than clearly laying out his plans. And ACT's David Seymour says it is Labour, not ACT, seeking to divide public policy along racial lines.
If the Prime Minister thinks that ACT is making co-government divisive, wait till he hears what Labour's been up to.
The government is in the middle of a full policy reset, with changes expected to its Three Waters programme, which has co-governance at its core. Senior Māori Minister Nanaia Mahuta has overseen the project thus far, but lost the portfolio to Kieran McAnulty this week as part of a cabinet reshuffle. Taranaki iwi leader Jamie Tuta says they expect the same level of engagement and partnership.
By and large, what we ask is that we are respected and that he and his ministers engage openly with us in the event that there are any changes.
We're here to stay. We're a treaty partner in this country. We seek an equitable position around all of these issues, including Three Waters.
Tuku Morgan has more reason than most to want that. He's been appointed the chair of one of the Three Waters iwi bodies. Chris Hipkins is keeping coy as to what his reset might mean, but expected change in his and other ministers' language. He's acknowledged the government has done a bad job explaining exactly what co-governance is.
Look, I love the phrase mahi tahi, working together. Ultimately that's what it's about. It's about the Crown working with Māori to advance our common interests.
A mere change in rhetoric, though, won't be enough to placate its critics. Waitangi commemorations continue through the long weekend. If it's to continue as it started, expect fireworks.
And it's 20 to 6, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. We'd love to hear from you if you are on the Coromandel, state of emergency declared there. What is it like in your part of the motu? 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. How are you coping with those two major roads with significant damage in 25A? Well, it seems like that's a, excuse the pun, long road to recovery. Evie is here with the headlines. Anea Evie, mena pita pita kōrero.
The Human Rights Commission says Auckland will face a renting cost of living crisis if landlords hike payments after the floods. More than 20 organisations, including the Green Party, want a rent freeze to help people get back on their feet. The Human Rights Commission's Housing Inquiry Manager, V. Blackwood, told Checkpoint the government needed to reassure people they weren't about to face rent rise to add to their burdens. 234 Auckland homes are off limits. An iwi leader who met with Prime Minister Chris Hipkins today says the need to stop racism in New Zealand is becoming much more urgent. Margaret Mutu of Ngāti Kahu was part of the Iwi Chairs Forum at Waitangi. She says former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was very good at understanding Aotearoa's racism problem, and it's important the momentum doesn't slow. A coroner has ruled the death of a toddler in her family's front-loader washing machine was an accident. The girl died in Christchurch Hospital a day after her parents found her in the machine in February 2021. Coroner Alexander Ho's recommendations include making child safety settings more accessible. 17 North Island locations have had their wettest ever January. In contrast, 18 South Island locations saw record lows for rain. Invercargill had its driest January since records began in 1900. And oil giant Shell has reported a record-breaking $61.5 billion profit after Russia's invasion of Ukraine pushed up fuel prices. Those are the headlines. Now to traffic. In Northland, slips are slowing traffic down on State Highway 1 in the Dome Valley, and the highway is still closed from the Bryn Derwents to Waipu. Moving down the country, State Highway 1, the Hibiscus Coast Highway on-ramp northbound is still closed. In the central North Island, a slip has closed State Highway 43 between Stratford and Taumaru Nui. Finally, Wakakotahi says to expect delays of 4 to 5 hours on some routes if you're driving into the Coromandel Peninsula this weekend because of detours. And State Highway 23 to Raglan is unfortunately also still closed. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā, iho. Getting a lot of feedback. Let's just read this one about housing. Hi Lisa, I've had a very frustrating day trying to do something helpful. I'm on the North Shore with 2 spare bedrooms with a bathroom that I'd like to offer to a flood refugee family. Would suit a couple with 1 or 2 children. I used to have a B&B, guests pre-pandemic, but this is out of kindness and not a commercial offer. I tried a couple of community hubs, no joy, phoned Auckland Emergency Management, supposedly looking for emergency accommodation for flood victims. They just suggested a look on Facebook. I could have a family for a few weeks, need to meet them first to see if they and this solo 74-year-old biddy and her cat would be a good fit. I hate to think of people carrying on to live in an unhealthy flood-affected home. How can I find a needy family? It's a really good question, and there are lots of people who are wanting to help. We'll see what we can find out, Dorothy, and hopefully we'll be able to let you know. It is almost 6:15. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National, and so sorry about getting to Nona Peltier late. People will be on the edges of their seats. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier joins us in the studio to talk business. Okay, 2 sides of a coin. Let's start with the consumers. Consumer confidence has bounced off record lows. What are the numbers, Nona?
Well, they're still not really wonderful numbers. We're looking at let's see. Well, the record low was 74. Okay, this was a number of consumer confidence. We're now at 83.4, but 100 being confidence. So we're still in the double drums, I would say. People are not very confident about the outlook, but improving. Let's say they're improving. Just want to put a positive spin at the end of the week. What do you think?
Improving until Noah's Ark cruise pass.
They're saying that a net 7% of respondents expect to be better off this time next year. So that's good. That's up from 17 points in December. And let's see. Well, a lot of them still don't think it's a very good time to buy a major appliance. That's not a surprise, a net 28% there. So basically, look, these numbers are not great, but they're saying that in the future, sometime ahead, things are looking a little brighter.
Okay, so what about businesses? Where are their confidence levels at?
Okay, well, first of all, the spending that we saw coming through after the deluge and the flooding and so forth has not been great. According to a company called Wordline, they're the ones who manage transactions. They're saying basically that consumer spending at core retail merchants dropped 0.7% in January. That reflects a lot of what we saw with the rain coming through. Like the amount of spending was down, say, 20% on those really rainy days. So people definitely were staying home and closing their wallet, that's for sure. When we look at businesses, so merchants had a bit of a dip there in January. In December, the company called Equifax, they look after credit applications and so forth and what people are doing in terms of demand. Business demand for credit was down in the December quarter, but some of it was better than others. So, for example, some service sectors were not looking for any credit because things were going really well. Others were dropping in credit because they didn't want to borrow money for investment. For example, construction, rental, hiring, and real estate were on the down low. And the other ones, agriculture, accommodation, food services, retail, were a little bit more buoyant. But there was an indication that businesses were going to prepare for the future by applying for credit, which typically means that they're looking ahead and thinking maybe they won't have as much cash flow coming up. So there was that. But look, I have to say, I spoke with Rod Duke today because he announced that they had record sales for the year. He's the Briscoe Group.
Yep.
And he also said that he expected to make a record profit of not less than $88 million for the year ended January. And I asked him what his outlook was for the year, and he said, recession? What recession? I'm in the no recession camp. So, see, some people are very positive.
Okay, we're about to cross live to the Coromandel, Nona, so a really quick sprint around the markets and dollar, please.
All right, so we rose 0.33%. In the NZX Top 50, 45-point gain to 12,197. And the New Zealand dollar gained, well, actually it fell a little bit against the US dollar at 64.7. That's about a half a cent down from where we were yesterday. 91.6 Australian and 53 British pence, which is a little bit better than usual.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier with business there. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And as you will have heard, Coromandel declared a state of emergency. It's facing a massive clean-up with a severely compromised roading network, including main routes, State Highway 25 and 25A. Emergency Management Minister Kieran McAnulty visited the district yesterday, but he's declined Checkpoint's interview request. Coromandel MP National Scott Simpson is on the peninsula and joins us now. Kia ora, Scott. How's the community faring?
Hi, Lisa. Look, it's been a very long week. I'm just thinking back to Friday a week ago when it was raining so heavily in Auckland and across our region. And boy, what a battle and a series of dramas we've had since then here on the Coromandel. So look, the community is, I think, coping as well as can be expected under the circumstances, as they say. We are not unused to heavy weather events here in the Coromandel, but this one has been out of the bag and it's really testing and stressful for so many of our people.
Scott, not unsurprising, we're having a few problems with your line, so I'm just wondering if I can get you to move around a little bit to see if we can get a bit of a clearer connection. Yeah. So this was supposed to be the salvation summer, right? Last couple have been really taxing in terms of COVID, but this is a total washout. Are you lobbying government on behalf of business for some kind of support package?
Yeah, absolutely. We had Kieran McAnulty, the Minister for Emergency Management, here in the Coromandel yesterday, and both the Mayor, Len Salt, and myself put a very strong case for support for our local community to get things done fast. We really do need that main arterial highway opened as fast as we can. We all understand and accept it's going to be a long job. Our business people, it's really, really hard for them. They've had a couple of summers where COVID restrictions have meant they've either been not able to enjoy the more summer peak revenue season, and then, of course, season they were expecting to try and recoup some of that, and that hasn't happened either. So many of our local business people are under enormous business pressure, and that's likely to continue. One of the interesting things about business on the Coromandel...
apologies. I really apologise for interrupting you again. We're still having a few problems with your phone, so I'm just going to ask you, I don't know, maybe pace... Maybe keep moving, yeah. So in terms of that lobbying, like you've mentioned the road there, I'm asking you about direct support to businesses, direct support like some kind of payout or cash support to businesses. Are you asking for that? Do you think it will be necessary? Can businesses survive?
There will be some businesses that probably won't survive. I haven't had an opportunity to have a complete assessment yet, but there will be some who are very, very stressed financially. Look, I have been asking the Minister for financial support. He wasn't able to commit to any yesterday, but he has at least gone away and said, yeah, I will put it to my colleagues and see what we can do. So it wasn't an outright no, but it certainly wasn't a green light yes either.
You're in a good spot, so don't move. Are people comparing this to, in some ways, the COVID lockdown, because you are, well, largely cut off?
Well, yes, at the moment there's really only one route onto the Coromandel Peninsula, and that's a very long way for people north of the peninsula. They have to go through Paeroa, Waihi, through to Whangamata and then north, and that road itself is potentially slip-prone too. So, yeah, this weekend could be challenging. That's why the Mayor has declared a local emergency declaration, and the state of emergency enables those isolated communities to receive the support that they may need if the weather gets worse or there are more slips.
Yeah, so where does this leave you with the sort of detour and the long way round? Not necessarily the greatest for trucks, and you need supplies in and out, groceries, the basics and all the rest of it. Where does it leave you?
Well, those are all the questions that immediately come to mind. My first concern is for people's well-being and their health and safety. We have an older age demographic in the Coromandel, and the need for access to health services and facilities is paramount in my mind. And then comes the need for the provision of food, fuel, and other services. Now, those heavy vehicles need to travel over some pretty narrow, windy roads with a lot of one-way bridges as they go past.
Nobody really wants to discuss this, but it's a conversation we're going to have to need to have. So there's some parts of the Coromandel that simply should not be rebuilt and it's time to retreat from them.
Well, the Thames Coromandel District Council, to their credit, has for a number of years now been very careful and cautious about granting consents for coastal properties, and they've been doing that for a long time. But look, this is a wider conversation not just for our region but for the whole country. The Coromandel electorate has one of the longest coastlines of any electorate in the country, and we have much private property but also an enormous amount of public asset infrastructure at coastal level. People who know the coast road around the peninsula will know that much of it is not much above high tide at the best of times, let alone in a storm situation.
So who pays for that then?
Well, those are very big questions that are yet to be answered, and there are no happy answers about who pays. The questions are going to be addressed, we're told, by the current government in their climate adaptation piece of legislation. We haven't seen that yet, but that will be a piece of legislation that seeks to answer the questions you're asking.
So, Scott, just on 25A, right, that is a massively compromised road. I mean, you've got basically... I don't know, it's a gaping canyon there at the moment. How long can you survive without that road? You know, because some roads in Kaikoura were like 14 months to fix. Is that acceptable if you're facing the same?
Look, I'm not a roading expert or an engineer. It would be impossible for me to offer any kind of informed opinion as to how long that might take. All I know is that when I was up there yesterday, 70 metres of the road had disappeared between the previous 24 hours. It was a moving feast, literally. The land is still moving, and until it actually settles down a bit, I don't think even the expert engineers are going to be able to put any kind of time frame around that. But we will be asking NZTA and their officials and their advisors to give us their best estimates about their plan for remediation, how long they think it's going to take, and when we can get back to some normality. Those extra long roads around the peninsula just add cost and time to everything that comes in and out of the peninsula. Ultimately, we all pay for that.
Kia ora for your time. That is Scott Simpson, who's the Coromandel MP, National MP there. And meanwhile, businesses reliant on traffic through their towns are devastated that slips are disrupting their usual trade ahead of Waitangi weekend. Slips on the Brynderwen Hills are causing a detour for Aucklanders travelling up north, with State Highway 1 from Brynderwen to Waipu closed since last Friday. Drivers are unable to travel through Wellsford and Kaiwaka. And with that section unlikely to open anytime soon, businesses are bracing for an abysmal long weekend. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Angus Drever filed this report.
Friday lunchtime in Kaiwaka would usually be a bustling pit stop for travellers, but it now resembles a ghost town. Next to the well-loved Kaiwaka cheese shop, Cafe Utopia is a tourist destination known for its unique design and sculpture garden. Worker Juanita Long says this time of year is always flat out.
Probably a little bit slower now because school's gone back, obviously next week, but especially long weekends, we're usually super busy, crazy busy.
She says they've got too many staff rostered on today. With all the cleaning already completed, some will have to be sent home. This summer is not the one they've been hoping for.
We've probably had maybe 8 days of nice sunshine since Christmas. It's been really hard actually for the old businesses around here, but you keep going and you hopefully get a few customers in here and there.
They're crossing their fingers for some local support over the weekend. Up the road at Nonna Italian Bakery, it's a similar story.
At the moment, we keep sending the stuff home because that's how bad it is. There's pretty much nothing, as you can see. To the point that if we don't sell the stuff that we have, everything will go, even the preparation ahead of the public holiday, everything will go in the bins.
Owner Eviola Havili says they've lost at least 60% of their business due to the detour of Aucklanders travelling north. They've been left in limbo until the road reopens.
So we just do what we can, really. Just cut down on the stuff, cut down on the product. Just go from there, just go home with nothing, really, pretty much. It's just that it's one thing after the other, just when you think you can recover from COVID.
In Wellsford, on the main street at Hobbs Gifts and Homewares, behind the counter, Talia Bryden is the only one in store.
We should be very busy. Lots of travellers and holiday makers, but it's just very quiet.
They're pinning their hopes on some loyal regulars to do some browsing.
I guess we can only hope that we get some sunshine and people might want to do a bit of local travelling around.
5 minutes drive away is another attraction that would be hard to miss. Large plastic zebras and springbok, along with the South African flag, are usually enough to entice drivers to pull over here at the Biltong Plus shop. But Marissa Bosman says business has slowed to a trickle since last Friday.
We've had about a fifth of the people that we would usually have over a long weekend, maybe even less, especially over long weekends such as this. This time of year, the long weekends are busier than the rest of the year, being usually sunny and wonderful. So it's a time of year that we tend to build up a little bit of savings to get us through the winter months.
While they have some regulars popping in to stock up on their favourite international snacks, it's nothing compared to what their summer trading is usually.
Overall, about 70+% of our customers are people passing through on holiday, going to batches, going, long weekends or just weekends away or visiting. If we're going by today, we're not going to have a good weekend.
With no indication of when State Highway 1 from Bindurwin to Waipu will reopen, it could be a tough next few weeks.
A number of you getting in touch about rents. Brian says, of course there should be a rent freeze. Further down the island, they've got great weather. This person says, sitting in my shed relaxing after a week at work's currently 34.5 degrees. Not so relaxing. Cheers, Alistair, near Christchurch, with sweat dripping off my eyeballs, says Alistair. And we will have more on those very high temperatures down south after 6.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. I'm Evie Ashton. The Thames Coromandel District Council has declared a state of emergency ahead of forecast heavy rain tonight. The state of emergency was preemptively declared earlier this afternoon, putting the region on high alert. Mayor Len Salt says this gives residents time to prepare.
It's about staying ahead of developing situations so that we can take the necessary steps to keep people safe and out of harm's way, rather than waiting until an event happens and going in, declaring a state of emergency and going in and cleaning up afterwards.
Len Salt is urging residents to stay safe ahead of the oncoming storm. Rain is meant to subside tomorrow with a chance of showers around midday. Auckland Emergency Management says extending the local state of emergency declaration will give the city more options. Duty Controller Rachel Kelleher says Auckland remains in the response phase of the severe flooding, with new damage and risks still being discovered. She says access to emergency powers is still required.
This significant event continues to require a degree of coordination for that response alongside a range of partner agencies, given the scale and the widespread nature of the emergency.
The extension of the state of emergency is for a further 7 days, but officials say it could end sooner. Meanwhile, Mayor Wayne Brown has admitted that he dropped the ball when the city was hit with the main deluge a week ago. He's apologising for slow communications and says the priority ahead of the long weekend is to ensure that Aucklanders are safe, well informed and well supported. The local body ward worst hit in Auckland's flooding has more than 50 red-stickered houses. That's a quarter of the total of 232 houses so far that are too dangerous to enter. Auckland Emergency Management says Mount Albert, Mount Eden and Mount Roskill together have 56 red placards and 254 yellow with limited access. Auckland Transport is telling people to allow extra time for their journeys this weekend as road damage and slips may cause delays. There are 29 road closures and multiple slips across the region which are affecting some public transport services and driving conditions. Auckland Transport says it has around 500 maintenance staff working on its network every day. It's recommending people avoid unnecessary travel and check road conditions if they do have to travel. The Human Rights Commissioner is urging the government to ensure rents remain stable in Auckland. Paul Hunt says the right to a decent home is especially important in a state of emergency. More than 20 organisations, including the Green Party, are calling for a rent freeze to help people get back on their feet after the floods. The New Zealand Property Investors Federation, meanwhile, says rent increases are inevitable. Opposition parties are pushing back against warnings not to whip up racial tensions for political gain. Chris Hipkins met with iwi leaders at Waitangi this morning for the first time as Prime Minister. Māori leaders made a plea for politicians to stop extreme and hurtful attacks and not throw them under the bus in election year. National and ACT were both name-checked as attack dogs by Waikato Tainui's Tukuroirangi Morgan, speaking afterwards. However, those parties say there should be a conversation about such fundamental issues and say it's Labour that's embarked on a divisive agenda, failing to take the public along with it. A 17-year-old boy has admitted an attack on a 14-year-old Christchurch girl in which he threatened to kill her. In early December, the teenager followed the girl through Barrington Park and attacked her. He was arrested on the 7th of December on charges including kidnapping, strangulation and sexual violation. The teenager, who continues to have name suppression, appeared in the Christchurch District Court today, where he pleaded guilty to all charges. He was remanded in custody for sentencing in May. The Attorney General in Israel has come out strongly against the government's plans to overhaul the judicial system. He says it would gravely damage the country's system of checks and balances. Here's the BBC's Sebastian Usher.
The showdown between the judicial authorities and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government is intensifying. Earlier today, the Attorney General Gali Baharef Miara said that Mr. Netanyahu himself should not have any involvement in proposals for a radical reform of the judicial system because his trial on corruption charges posed a potential conflict of interest. Now, she submitted a 112-page opinion to the Justice Minister saying that her concerns are over core principles.
A former football fern says it's a gross misalignment to have Saudi Arabia's tourism authority as a major sponsor of the Women's World Cup. The Cup will be co-hosted by Aotearoa. FIFA's announcement has sparked outrage and it has yet to address concerns. Saudi Arabia has a poor record when it comes to discrimination against women, its treatment of LGBT communities and human rights. Former football fern Rebecca Souden told Midday Report that it's a progressive sport and players aren't happy.
They're definitely not going to stay silent on it. We've already seen social media popping out with a lot of players sharing posts about signing a petition from Amnesty. And so, I can expect a lot of opposition.
The Cup starts in July. And the White House says it supports Russian athletes being able to compete in the upcoming Paris Olympics under a neutral flag. A spokesperson says it should be absolutely clear they're not representing either the Russian state or Belarus. Last week, the International Olympic Committee opened the door to Russians participating as neutrals, saying a total ban could constitute discrimination. Sanctions are already in place over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life, Pacific Waves, Friday Night Live. We've got your Friday evening all wrapped up. Dan Slevin is with us for Shortcut, some big and small screen recommendations for Waitangi weekend. And Finn Johansson is at the music festival, Welcome to Nowhere in the Manawatu. And we're hoping he'll crawl out from his tent to give us his music picks. Or he might be under a rock. Star on Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland, Auckland and the Coromandel Peninsula. Showers becoming isolated today, then clearing from Auckland and Coromandel tomorrow. For Gisborne, partly cloudy, thunderstorms possible inland tomorrow afternoon. Waikato and Bay of Plenty. Scattered showers with thunderstorms possible about Waikato today. Showers clearing and fine breaks developing tomorrow. From Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumaru Nui, Taihape and Taupo, also Hawke's Bay and Waidadapa. Scattered rain or showers, a few thunderstorms possible north of Kapiti in the afternoons and evenings, mainly inland. Fine breaks developing tomorrow. Nelson and Buller, fine spells, a few showers, mainly inland. Westland and Fiordland. Rain or showers with heavy falls at times. Gale northerlies developing about the fjords late tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Mainly fine and hot. Isolated showers in the afternoons and evenings, mainly inland with thunderstorms possible today for Otago and for Southland. And for Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. It's 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A call tonight for Aotearoa to follow Australia and drop the monarch from our banknotes. Australia's Reserve Bank has announced it won't replace the image of Queen Elizabeth II on its $5 notes with an image of King Charles. Instead, it will consult on a design that honours the culture and history of the First Nations people. New Zealand Republic, kia mana motuhake Aotearoa, wants us to do the same. Campaign Chair Lewis Holden joins us now. Kia ora, Lewis.
Kia ora, Lisa.
What exactly are you proposing and why?
Well, what we would like to see from our Reserve Bank is a similar decision to what Australia's Reserve Bank has done, which is to consult with the public on what the design of our $20 note, which is the last one to feature the late Queen, should be in the future.
Why not keep her? She's a big part of our history.
Well, she's a part of history, but of course the Queen has sadly passed away. And since the 90s, we've slowly added New Zealanders of many different cultures and backgrounds, etc., to our notes. And we think it's time that we make the next logical step with the $20 note.
But in part of your campaign material, you're talking about, the identity of Aotearoa. Has the royal family not played a significant role in that? And a number of other people on our banknotes, well, they're deceased as well. We haven't got rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of having a monarch on your money is all back to the idea that they are the sort of supreme authority and all that sort of thing. That's obviously an idea that a large number of New Zealanders now would simply not accept. And the polling shows that there's a growing number of people who want to have a New Zealand citizen as a head of state. And the idea that power flows down from an unelected sovereign, I think, is anathema to a lot of people. So I think there's that sort of fundamental moral point of view, but from a symbolic point of view as well, in terms of our identity, etc. Yes, I would argue that by and large the royals have faded out of our present day society, and as is the case in Australia, and that's why they've made the decision that they want to have an Indigenous flavour when it comes to their $5 note. It's something that actually represents contemporary Australia, and that's what we're saying, is that there needs to be a note that represents contemporary Aotearoa.
So you talked there about people's attitudes to royalty generally, but more specifically, how do you think the mood of the nation has changed, if at all, following the death of Queen Elizabeth, in terms of how we feel about royals?
I think there has been a fundamental shift in the way that people view the monarchy, because it was largely bound up in positive feelings towards the late Queen. And that's a mixture of nostalgia about the Second World War, because, of course, the Queen did serve during the Second World War. So that generation, I think, had a very close link. That simply doesn't exist now with the royals and with Charles. His children, of course, without getting into any of that controversy, pretty good at generating headlines and entertaining us. But we need more than that. We need something that represents our identity to the world, and just being part of that sort of celebrity monarchy, which is what the institution seems to have evolved into, is just, really not us in the 21st century.
Lewis, have you got any solid thoughts on who would be good contenders if we did go with a New Zealander?
As usual, I mean, there's a lot of jokes, sort of suggestions. People were suggesting Thingy. People were a bit more seriously suggesting Billy G. James. One serious one that I saw is a letter to the editor today suggesting Charles Upham. So look, we've got so many people that we could do, and we don't even have to have a person on it. Of course, we could have a nice vista of Aotearoa, or some Milford Sound, etc. It doesn't have to be a person, but this is an opportunity for us to have something that represents our country to the world.
Do you reckon we're going to agree on who the replacement should be, if there is to be one?
Unfortunately, well, we're not putting a flag on it, right? So, fortunately, we don't have to relitigate that whole debacle. But yes, the decision on who exactly should be on it eventually, lies with the Reserve Bank, and so I hope that, we can be guided by their wisdom on something that represents all of us.
So, Lewis, if people want to engage in this debate and try and move the needle, what can they do?
So Action Station is running a petition. So if you go onto their website, Action Station, there's a petition running for the Reserve Bank called Make Our Money Reflect Aotearoa. And you can sign that. I think last time I checked, we were over 2,000 signatures on it to the Reserve Bank.
Hey, Lewis, just before you go, so we've been talking about banknotes, right? What about all the coins? Queen Elizabeth is on the back of all the coins. Can she stay on the coins, or would you get rid of her there as well?
Yeah, funny thing is, I mean, yeah, that will be the next issue, of course, is what happens with the coins. But the coins actually stay in circulation for years. I mean, you used to still be able to find, old ones that had the previous monarch on them. So, those things stay around for years and years and years. And I'd actually say, because we use cash less as a society these days, that actually they'll probably be in circulation for many years to come, still be legal tender. So, look, that will be another debate. But certainly, obviously, our position would be that we don't need to have the sovereign's head on our coins.
Lewis, you've just said something that almost has made your argument utterly irrelevant, right? Who has cash?
Well,
Who uses cash?
Hardly anyone. Yeah, and no, it's a fair point. As we're becoming a cashless society, which I suppose re-emphasises the fact of how irrelevant a lot of these things actually are.
Interesting conversation. Hey, thanks for being with us, Lewis. That is Lewis Holden, who's from New Zealand Republic, Kia mana motuhake a Aotearoa, debating whether we should get rid of the monarch on our money, our dollar notes. If you're in the South Island, temperatures reached a scorching 33 degrees in some places today, including Timaru and Christchurch.
Too hot.
Too hot.
Far
You
too
doing
hot.
anything to cool down today, or will you be?
Going into the supermarket.
Love it. It's like Aussie weather.
Thank goodness for being able to work inside with the air conditioning. I do struggle, but I think knowing that we've only got to deal with it for a week, it's all good.
It's just hot. I don't like the weather. It's just, we're not used to the weather, right? We're always used to like cold weather, cold breeze, and now that we just have humid, it's just gross. No one can handle it.
It's like very high temperature, means even if we sit in the office, if we need to put like AC, and when it come out, it's like burning outside. Yeah, it's nice. I'm from India, so I'm pretty much used to it.
Well, I love it because I've just come from Environment Canterbury and we've got a lovely air-conditioned building, so it's actually quite nice to come out here into the heat. It's beautiful.
It's a bit of a shock to the system, and it does make things more challenging, and I'm one of those people who my body tends to overreact to the heat, so it makes it so much harder to do things, but it's good to have summer as well.
It's a little bit too much. Yeah. Yep. Not looking forward to the car at home because the aircon stuff, so.
But spare a thought for those in Queensland, where heatwave conditions are expected to push electricity usage to record levels, with Brisbane reaching 37 degrees Celsius. The dew point, which indicates the amount of moisture in the air, is also tipped to peak at the highest possible level. All that is expected to put pressure on the electricity grid as residents flick the switch to turn on the aircon. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
Queenslanders are pretty familiar with heat and humidity, but this is something else.
How are you going to get through today?
Well, I'm going to go home when I've finished my shopping, which won't be very long, and I'm going to sit in the air conditioning and do a few things indoors. I won't be going outside again.
It's already very hot, isn't it?
It is. The humidity is so high.
And can you describe to people who aren't in Brisbane just what it feels like right now?
Feels like you're in pea soup.
That's a good description.
The Bureau of Meteorology says the sweltering conditions in the southeast of the state are caused by a slow-moving hot air mass hovering over the region. It won't stop Mike, who was planning to do the opposite of many people.
I'm playing golf.
With 37 degrees predicted, have you ever played in such heat before?
Yes, yeah.
And how do you feel afterwards?
Wear the right clothing and have plenty of water and everything else, and enjoy the game.
The dew point, which measures the humidity in the air, is nearing all-time highs for the region.
I actually think I was in South Australia for a long time too, 40-odd degrees down there, but it's the humidity that's killing us. It's not so much the heat, it's the humidity, and until it stops. Good luck, everybody. All these poor people that have got no air conditioning or fans, I don't know how they cope.
Bureau of Meteorology forecaster Helen Reid says the dew point is a more useful indicator than relative humidity because it's a more consistent measurement. She says right now the conditions are more like the tropics in wet season.
So that when your body tries to, say, sweat and have that evaporative cooling effect on your body, there's less air for the water of your body to escape into because the humidity is high.
The heatwave conditions are expected to push energy usage to a record high this afternoon. Energy supplier Energex says the system should cope. Spokeswoman Emma Oliveri.
So we will see demand creep up during the day as it gets hotter and people are more reliant on air conditioners, but we are more than prepared to respond to whatever we need to respond to, and we're working closely with Powerlink and the Australian Energy Market Operator who are looking at the market and the transmission network.
The peak in energy usage will happen later in the day when people return home from work and school.
Air conditioning is a huge driver of demand, so between 40 and 50% of our network peak load in summer in Queensland can be attributed to air conditioning use. But you also have people coming home from school and work and turning on all of the appliances, so getting dinner ready, turning on ovens, turning TVs, turning on lights. All of those sorts of things do contribute to the load.
As builders sweat it out on construction sites, they'll be envious of Raphael, who's picked the right job for the conditions.
How are you going to survive today?
Working hard.
Yeah, what do you do?
Refrigeration, conditioning.
Do you get to benefit from working inside a cold room?
Yes.
You do?
It gives relief.
And with Auckland's unrelenting rain forecast to ease tonight, attention is turning to another storm-hit region. If you've just joined us, the Coromandel has also declared a state of emergency, with the region largely cut off due to a severely compromised roading network. A number of slips have closed roads in the area, including a large part of State Highway 25A. Finn Blackwell reports.
Evan Davies is a beekeeper who runs Coromandel Honey just out of Shelley Beach near Colville. He says the unrelenting rain has made this harvest season the worst in over a decade.
I can't get to a lot of my bee sites because it's too wet, and the honey harvest is the worst we've ever had in 12, 13, 14 years of beekeeping.
He's waiting for a chance to harvest what remains of his honey.
It's just a very bad harvest, so there won't be a lot of honey to sell, and I guess it'll put us backwards, so it's a bit of a shame, but that's what it is. There's a lot of other people with worse situations.
Evan says the rest of the area is in similar shape.
2 roads at the back of my father's farm, which is completely gone, and there's another an access way that just up the road from us. There's a house that's got a slip that's dropped out from it underneath it. He's having to evacuate, and his house has moved.
The roads south of Evan are closed due to an enormous slip at Ruamahanga Bay on the Thames coast, blocking State Highway 25. 7 houses also have had to be evacuated in Koputuaki Bay. Thames Coromandel Mayor Len Salt says he's never seen anything like it.
I've been in the Coromandel for 13 years. I've been mayor since October. So yes, it's the worst summer I've ever had as mayor. I'm really feeling for our communities. Our business people are really feeling the pain of this.
He says they're going to need all the help they can get when it comes to fixing slips across the region.
I don't have any doubt whatsoever that the Minister and the government will be stepping in to provide a solution as soon as it's possible, because we can't do without that access.
But for Evan, it's a matter of waiting for the rain to stop.
I guess the weather's had a worse effect than we expected. I don't think we expected it to be quite so, to be quite this bad.
Met Service forecasts show rain is set to ease in the area tomorrow, leaving some like Evan hopeful, waiting for the calm after the storm.
It is 21 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Russia's Vladimir Putin has compared the country's invasion of Ukraine to the fight against Nazi Germany. He claims history is repeating itself on the 80th anniversary of the Soviet victory over the Nazis in the Battle of Stalingrad. Mr. Putin says his country is once again forced to resist the aggression of the West. Meanwhile, a former army officer says he witnessed Russian soldiers committing crimes in Ukraine, including torture, looting and threats of rape. Konstantin Yefremov says he saw one Ukrainian prisoner of war being beaten, shot and humiliated. Mr. Yefremov is now seen as a traitor by Russia. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg went to meet him.
This is the war in Ukraine, the official Russian version of it. Packaged, promoted, propagandized by Moscow. Fearless Russian soldiers fighting the good fight, defending the motherland. But Konstantin Yefremov was there, and the reality, he says, is very different. Konstantin was a senior lieutenant in the Russian army, but he's fled Russia. And he's agreed to tell me about crimes he says he saw Russian soldiers committing in Ukraine. Starting here. This is one of Konstantin's first photos from Ukraine, an airbase seized by Russian troops in Melitopol.
I saw looting there. Soldiers and officers grabbed everything they could. They climbed all over the planes and went through all the buildings. Buckets, axes, bicycles, they bunged it all in trucks.
Konstantin says that on the day Russia invaded Ukraine, he tried to quit the army. He was warned he'd face up to 10 years in prison for desertion. In occupied Ukraine, he was sent to guard this artillery unit, and then a facility where he says he witnessed Ukrainian prisoners of war being tortured.
The Ukrainian had a blindfold on. The colonel put a pistol to the prisoner's forehead and said, "I'm going to count to 3 and then shoot you in the head." He counted and then fired just to the side of his head, on both sides. The colonel started shouting at him. I said, "Comrade Colonel, he can't hear you. You've deafened him."
The interrogations became increasingly violent, claims Konstantin.
During another interrogation, the colonel shot the prisoner in the arm and in the right leg, under the knee, and hit the bone. I went to the commanders and said the Ukrainian needs to go to hospital. He'll be dead by morning from blood loss. We dressed him up in a Russian uniform and took him to hospital. We told him, "Don't say you're a Ukrainian prisoner of war, because either the doctors will refuse to treat you, or the injured Russian soldiers will hear you and shoot you."
The BBC has verified documents, photographs and videos provided by Konstantin confirming his identity and his movements. Once he'd returned to Russia, back on base, he was accused of a serious breach of discipline for refusing to go back to Ukraine. He was dismissed from the army. A Russian human rights group, Gulag.net, has helped him leave the country.
I apologize to the whole Ukrainian nation for coming to their home as an uninvited guest with a weapon in my hands. I don't even have a moral right to ask for forgiveness from the Ukrainians. I can't forgive myself, so I can't expect them to forgive me.
Konstantin says that senior officers called him a traitor for being anti-war, but he points out that he gave an oath to protect his country, not to attack another.
Some of your feedback here. Tim's got in touch from the Coromandel. Says the Coromandel 309 road, the 309 road is, well as a slip at Coromandel town, also has a major slip about 6 k's from the Whitianga end. About 1/3 of the road has slipped down a steep drop to the river, leaving just one questionable lane dodgy, in my opinion, especially as there has been an old slip on the other bank side, says Tim. Short version of that story, be very careful. Finally tonight, it is a dish Britain is known for around the world, fish and chips. It can be hard for customers to resist popping in for some once they've caught the smell of vinegar-soaked chips and battered fish. But not for one chippy in southern England. Its former owner has been fined by the local council after years of complaints from neighbours that his chippy was too smelly. The BBC's Simon Jones went there to sniff out the story.
You might think the smell of fish fresh from the fryer or chips drowned in salt and vinegar would get stomachs rumbling. But not here at the Ocean's 11 fish and chip shop in Farnham. The pong is certainly strong, so much so that the local council said it was causing a nuisance. One reviewer online wrote, "The surrounding area is bathed in what can only be described as a burnt fat and rotting fish smell, which gets worse the hotter the weather." And people living nearby say the whiff is not whetting their appetites.
Every day, if you go into the back gardens, you just smell it wafting across the gardens. It's a sort of oily smell of, well, fish and chips obviously, but it's just a horrible smell, and you just can't enjoy being out in the back garden.
It's quite acrid. It's something that gets up your nose and you can't forget the smell for quite some time. Yeah, it does linger a bit.
The former owner has been served up with a fine of nearly £5,000 for failing to deal with the stench. Waverley Borough Council said the prosecution was a last resort, but businesses had to consider their neighbours. The fish and chip shop now has a new owner who is promising to upgrade the kitchen's extraction system in an effort to sort out the smell.
Some more of your feedback before we head off. This on money. Australia is not going to put King Charles on their notes, replacing the current Queen Elizabeth II. She's on one of their notes. And a group here is calling for New Zealand to do the same. This person says, a picture of Farlap eating pav on our new notes would be great. Another says, a head of state changes every year. The Queen has lasted 50 years. On the subject of people carrying cash also, this person says, a cashless society is dependent on technology. Every Christchurch person I know who was there in the quakes carries cash. Otherwise, they couldn't have got a loaf of bread or a bottle of milk in that immediate post-quake time. That one from Sarah. Someone else says, the person you had on, the Republican, this is Lewis talking about changing the picture on our notes. They believe that is a minority view in this country, the wanting to remove the head of state from our money. This is totally undemocratic. The process of removing the visibility of the monarch has been going on for years, despite the clear majority support for not altering our very stable constitutional arrangement. A lot of you in support of a rent freeze also getting in touch. Don't forget you can check out what you missed on Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcast from. And the news team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Do have a great weekend. Stay safe and dry.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The National Party is calling for the Corrections Minister to explain how potentially incorrect advice given to the parole board may have contributed to a death. Joseph Bryder stabbed his Colombian neighbour, Juliana Bonilla Herrera, to death in Christchurch last year, just 2 months after being released from prison. The parole board said at the time it was told by Corrections that no bed was available